So we're going to talk a little bit about our DevOps journey in HPE. And last night we had a speakers dinner, the pre-event where all the speakers got together. And someone across the table asked me, so how big is HPE right now? Normally that's a pretty straightforward question. You know, here's the revenue, here's the number of employees, et cetera. These days that's a moving target, right? So you can imagine a moving target like that with all the changes and what that means from a DevOps perspective. So that's kind of the context that we're going to provide here. So a few numbers, though, to illustrate kind of the size and complexity of the organization, at least a snapshot several months back. You can see hundreds of development teams we're talking about. So when you're talking about shifting to DevOps, what that might mean. Over 7,000 IT employees between Dev and Ops. In 2015, we had over 900 projects and over 1,400 apps at the time. So that gives a little perspective on some of the complexity. So what we've been going through, as many of you know, HP shifted and did a split of HPE and HPI. So that was a massive undertaking. That was a massive change. All along, we've been acquiring other companies and growing and shifting and merging. And then more recently, we've announced and we've been working on splitting off services, splitting off software. So what does that mean for an IT organization and what kind of chaos that generates? You can imagine a ton of challenge there. So look at some of these. So non-negotiable deadlines are first and foremost. That's one of the biggest challenges. You've got massive app cloning and separating, where we have to split applications off and clone them and duplicate, split data out. So that's been a massive undertaking. And then also all the reorgs and the team splits. Given the change, what better model is there than DevOps to handle a constant world of change? So that's what we're going to talk about our journey. So if we kind of rewind back to 2014, we started off with a set of pilots. So about 8 or 9 different teams that were already fairly advanced, and we launched a set of pilots. We weren't sure how it was going to go. It was the early days for us in HPE. It turned out that we had some great results. One of the examples from this fraud detection application, the service that we had, basically it reduced the typical 12-week implementation cycle in half down to 6 weeks. We went from massive downtime, business disruption when we did a release to 0 downtime. And then the number of user tickets radically decreased as well. Employees became a little happier, and they were well represented in our survey, increased the amount of control and support and processes that they implemented. The next question, though, was, great, we did these pilots, we did these initial unicorns. How do you then scale that? How do you take 1 or 2 of those and turn it into the massive change of hundreds of teams? So that's been the journey we've been on since then. One size does not fit all when you're talking about a large enterprise with a great diversity of types of teams, types of applications. And so we kind of looked at DevOps from a perspective of 3 core principles. Collaboration, codification, and automation. And we kind of put together, this is a subset, put together a set of best practices, of tools, of methodologies, and we treated this as a toolbox, if you will. A toolbox for working with a specific team and what fits that team best. What are the constraints that team is working under? What are the big challenges? Rather than a checklist, every team's going to do this, this, and this. We worked with each team to have them choose from this toolbox what makes sense for them to work out less friction, work out their speed. So we took this and we followed it through. As many of you have learned, and as you've heard in this conference many times, that the tool part of it is the easiest, and that was absolutely true for us. So all the culture parts was the tough part, and it remains tough. We're still on this journey. So team ownership, the autonomy, the overall business outcome, the focus, let alone the change management aspects of shifting a team and working with the other teams with all the friction points. So from here, let me hand it over to Olivier, and he can talk more about this pipeline process.
Thank you, John. Yes, so as we moved, across through this journey, there was a number of things that we wanted to do, a number of techniques that we wanted to implement. And John was saying, there is a big culture bubble, but there is also a big tech bubble, and that's what I do. I do technology. So for us, the implementation of the continuous delivery pipelines, which are essentially the set of tools that help move changes from ideas to something that delivers business value in production. Right? So it's a very loaded slide. It's not here to be read in totality. But essentially, it reads this way. So you go from the left, and you have the teams that we were talking about. And every change, this bubble, this change, so every change, not only the changes that we used to consider only, the application code change, or this one change in the test cases, for example, but any change. So change in the executable, in the application itself, change in the infrastructure, so adding a server, change in the configuration. So for example, moving from this Linux kernel parameter from that value to this other. Any kind of change really goes through this pipeline. And the goal of the pipeline is really to promote as quickly and as automatically as possible good changes, and to reject as quickly and as automatically as possible bad changes. Right? So it's a set of tools. We have GitHub Enterprise that we leverage. We use another product called Agile Manager for our Agile backlog. Then Jenkins, then lots of tools. That's not the issue. We have lots of tools. But the intent is that we don't look at the tools anymore. We look at the pipeline, right? So we see that as really a funnel that helps us move the changes from left to right. A few things that we could highlight there. So on the far right, we have our production environments and test environments. It's a mix of private cloud based on OpenStack, and also, I would say, physical infrastructure. And the last thing that I will mention is that on the far left is that only the pipeline, so only the machines, do have access to make changes in production. Right? So we don't give developers or production people any more access so that they can do an SSH session and do any changes that they want. They have to go through the pipeline. So anybody can suggest a change on the far left. It's going to be version controlled, peer reviewed, automatically tested, et cetera, right? So it's our secure way to inject changes and to manage changes. Lots of tools, right, that are there. We mentioned it's really a mix of open source and proprietary, including our own tools that we sell at HPE Enterprise. But at the end, I think those tools just solve some issues that we have, and they address some capabilities, but it's not about the tools themselves. I mean, they're just there, and they're very useful.
You can imagine how helpful it is to have a CD pipeline in place for automation when you're splitting a team into two and shifting it to another company, right? Or when you're doing an acquisition and bringing two teams together. If everything is automated in that pipeline, and this is the basis, this pipeline is the basis for all the work, it not only allows you to grow a team, to expand a team, but it allows you to shrink a team or split a team and bifurcate it and have a clone system. So without those teams that did not have this in place through our various splits and merges and acquisitions, it was night and day difference. So this has been a real godsend for this process that we've been going through.
Yeah. So as part of the pipeline, we actually have a number of tools that we use. Jenkins is obviously, who's using Jenkins? Who has heard about Jenkins, right? Yeah. So Jenkins is pretty central. This is really the high-level sequencer of everything. We have moved to Jenkins 2, which also provides native pipeline capabilities. Before that, there was a plugin for that. What you actually can, maybe you cannot see that, but it's this pipeline is actually leveraging Docker as well to create the builds. Other capabilities such as functional testing and regression testing. This is a tool that we use for our functional testing. So basically, our developers can create regression tests, taking advantage of the user interface. So we're not saying that user interface tests is always the way to do test automation, but that's a big one. So this is using Lean FTE. And we use telemetry, right? If you have read the Phoenix project, one of the big things is the feedback loop and also augmenting the feedback to the teams. And there was a nice talk this morning about feedback loops, which I think is totally convinced this is very, very important. And telemetry is what's really, really important, right? So allowing the developers or anyone in operations to actually see what's happening in production is a very important capability, right? So this is, again, leveraging one of the products that HPE sells. So the other aspect, so the pipeline is really our factory. This is really how we deliver changes and how we approve or reject changes. But the other thing that we did to accompany this transformation and those massive IT changes is to replace a lot of the existing manual processes or red tape kind of work with the pipeline itself. So for example, change management is basically we are moving, you guys probably know what ITIL is, and all of our changes are being normal changes following the ITIL definitions, right? So we don't need to ask for permission. We don't need to ask. They're just normal changes. And we can do that because we have a continuous delivery pipeline that allow us to be audited properly and to have all of those mechanisms, peer reviews and other mechanisms that we can show our auditors. So any change goes through the pipeline, and the pipeline becomes our way to have traceability and to have auditability as well. So we don't ask anymore for permission when we want to roll out changes, but we do that, but it's been codified. It's part of the pipeline. This permission process is part of the pipeline. The other thing that we do is that, and this is a screenshot of one tool that is very central in our pipeline as well, which is GitHub Enterprise, is that changes are automatically tested, right? So it's, again, if you've been at the general session this morning with this feedback loop mechanism, we try to put feedbacks as early as possible to back to the person that introduced the change. So a developer comes in, introduces a change, does a code commit. There's a number of tests that are going to pass. Actually, it's not a number of tests, but it's lanes of tests. So it goes from unitary tests, deployment tests, and deployment to a staging environment, and additional capabilities that are checked so that, again, developers do have their feedback as quickly as possible. This is another view from our pipeline, this is a Jenkins new user interface. The other thing that we've done is really changing the way we look at our infrastructure. We have a really massive infrastructure. Right? I don't know if I can share the number of servers, but it's more than 30,000. And it's been really a challenge to keep up with the infrastructure, deploying to production, actually asking for more servers and more capacity, or actually even returning servers back to the pool if we don't need them anymore. And what we have enabled lately, well, not lately, but it's been 2 years now, is a real cloud, right? So a real cloud, basically what we do is that we give our teams a tenant, which is this is OpenStack, and it's a private cloud, and we give them within that tenant CPU, a number of CPUs, memory, storage, networking capabilities, IP addresses and the like, so that they can arrange and rearrange that capacity the way they like. So essentially the interface between dev and operations, so there are multiple kinds of operations in our side, but the interface between dev and operations for the infrastructure is really the cloud. So they have an API to ask for more infrastructure and remove infrastructure if they need so. And also they have the SLA, right? So making sure that the cloud is always up and running. This is a big change. This is also a way for us to simplify the job of operations, because operations basically now they take care about the cloud being up, having enough capacity, so the capacity management, and they take care that the SLA and the API is always up and running. And the interface that the developers are consuming are the APIs. So operations is just changing the way they work. And Ashish, another thing that we do a lot is ChatOps.
And so I think throughout the conference, you've heard that tooling, processing, people, we need to do all these changes simultaneously. And the tooling and the processing part is actually the easier part of it. I think right at the beginning, John had this two big circles, and the cultural change and the collaboration between teams is actually the hardest part. And so we decided to adopt ChatOps. For how many of you here are familiar with ChatOps or are using them? So it's about 25, 30%. ChatOps are nothing but persistent, always on chat rooms, right? So how is it different from a Skype or an IRC? They're always on, right? So we never switch them off. The dialogues are always there. Everything's recorded, audited, auditable. But the key difference here is we integrate them with bots, right? These are scripts that interact with machines. So what that really enables us to do is actually have a true man-machine kind of collaboration interface. And how does that help? At the beginning of our charter to the DevOps journey, one of the principles that we agreed to kind of foster better collaboration was to be very open, right? So no more hiding of my own territory and I can do this and you need to do that, because those are silos and that's the mentality that people live with. With the augment and the implementation, with the implementation of ChatOps, what we were able to do is put it out there transparent and open to everyone. So if you had to make any change or you were doing something to collaboratively solve a problem, you went through ChatOps. So any actions that you took, any problem solving that you did, any brainstorming you did around that was always recorded. Any scripts that you ran, right, using the ChatOps bots, they're all recorded there. So what was the problem? What was the solution? Like who took the action? Always on. So it's, we call it augmented reality for dev and ops. So it's the dev teams are there, the ops teams are there, our security teams are, part of this as well. So we are increasingly using it not just to solve production problems or to introduce code, but also do some of the brainstorming ahead of the curve, which is how, we tend to bring these teams together. So imagine the teams are, distributed all over the US, lots of parts of Europe, Israel, and also Asia. So the other advantage we get out of this is, the US works during the day, and then, Europe comes online, and then Asia comes online. You don't lose the context of what's happened in the past 24 hours because it's always recorded there. It really has helped us kind of accelerate the collaboration between teams. And again, you can use your bots to quickly pull together any event status or what's going on with different machines. It's visible to everybody, right? All the team, everyone in the team knows what's going on. You can issue commands. The other thing that we found out was people are very social. They like to collaborate with each other, not just for work, but I went and saw this Wimbledon match today, or my son's playing soccer tomorrow, in this tournament. A live soccer game is going on, or a football game is going on, and people are sharing scores, right? People are sharing what's going on and what teams they support.
The bot is actually spitting the scores in the chat room, so it's not.
That too. So if nothing else, people started coming to this just for the social interaction part of it, started finding out that using ChatOps was really accelerating their collaboration. So again, not a mandate, right, if I'm right, but we just enabled an environment which actually people started really using this. The unexpected fallout of this, I don't think we really thought about it when we implemented this, was our auditors were really, really happy with this. And one of you wants to kind of share the experience of why that was?
Well, that's the thing, right? Everything is recorded, right? So that's always a good thing to see what happened and who did what and who decided to do something. So I think for system of records, we are using GitHub Enterprise, the source code management capabilities, obviously. And ChatOps is the other system of records that we use. Now, with all of those solutions, I think the challenge is always trying to, identify the signal over the noise. I mean, those things can be super noisy and can be a distraction. And this is where I think it's a big challenge. I don't know if it has been solved, but there are some people that really do awesome. They can just find what's needed and they don't get distracted. This can be a huge distraction as well. That said, I think if you compare to email, if you compare to other chat system, it's way more powerful than all of that. So there is a lot of opportunity to actually have a much better signal to noise ratio with that, thanks to the bots.
So Olivier has a certain term for email. He calls it anti-DevOps, right? And we actually were curious, and we did a couple of different points of data research. Internally, we had groups reporting up to 45% reduction in their emails related to work, right, with the introduction and adoption of this tool. To that effect, okay, one slide earlier than I thought, but I'll talk to this first. Again, I think, we've repeated this and we've heard it a number of times, but DevOps is really not a destination, it's a journey, right? And this mantra of continuously improving and learning from what you're doing is the way that we have found our teams to be most successful. Knowing that there'll be some failures, but if you can quickly learn with the feedback loops, whatever form they might be, and iterate and improve, has really helped us establish the next target and keep improving those metrics that you might be tracking. So we got curious and we decided to do an external research. So we have an internal research group here led by John, who's sitting here in the front row. And we did this internal surveys and we tried to see what was working or not. But we actually collaborated with YouGov, independent research company. It was a blind research. We went out and we tried to find out where different organizations were in their journey to DevOps and how they were performing with regards to the different kinds of approaches they were taking to DevOps. So as you can imagine, some folks claimed they had formally implemented DevOps and, DevOps was the way to do things in their organization. There was a mandate. There were others who were experimenting. We call them informal DevOps leaders. And then, there were some who were just not there yet. And we found some very interesting data coming back, right? So we found out those who were, quote unquote, informal DevOps leaders, those who took on an experimentation, continuous improvement kind of a approach to this, actually were more agile, faster, and were delivering higher quality kind of output to their business, for their business. Not only were they actually releasing more frequently, but actually their quality was better. And the ones that had taken a much more rigid DevOps kind of an approach were having to do much more remediation out there in the production environments. So that was interesting, right? Why was that? So it didn't mean that, we were, so we dug a little bit deeper into it. We found out that it wasn't that the informal DevOps leaders were not looking at some of the DevOps approaches, but we found out, I don't know if I have a pointer in this or not, but if you look at the 1, 2, 3, the fourth one with the arrow there, they actually focus first and foremost on communication and collaboration and using those tools to break down the silos between the teams. Not that they were not doing CI and CD. In fact, as we dug deeper, we found they were. But their approach to that was, let's break down the silos of and get the teams to collaborate and communicate first. And the teams should be empowered enough for them to solve the problems that they face on a daily basis. In fact, if you look on the right-hand side, their success metrics almost uniformly were better than like the more rigid DevOps approaches. They did have very strong DevOps practices in play. So they did CI, they're doing CT, they're doing CDs and delivery pipelines. And almost on every metric, they seem to be doing better. And why was this? I think, John, we dug a little bit deeper into that, and it seemed that those who learned very quickly and empowered their teams to go fix the problems they uncovered, the better they got at it, right? So just to summarize this, the informal DevOps leaders, those who are on an experimentation kind of a phase, those who are learning really quickly with the feedback loops and improving, seem to go with a higher velocity. They're very agile, and they quickly change direction based on what needs to be fixed, and they continuously keep improving. And this resonated a lot with the teams that John and Olivier lead, because we decided within HPIT not to give mandates to team to do DevOps in a certain way. I think it was more about the principles and not the rituals. Not about how you do something in a certain way and not do it another way. I think Olivier mentioned, for example, give access to the pipeline and not to the people. And when we started to do that, there was some initial resistance. How can I not have access to systems? But teams are empowered to do what they needed to do to make this happen. So, the learning from this survey kind of validated our journey, and this is why we did it, which is if you empower your teams and you enable collaboration and cultural kind of differences to go away between these teams, you actually achieve much better results. John?
Yeah, just to dovetail on that, as Ashish said, it kind of mirrors, this external survey mirrors what we found inside. And inside HPE IT, this very large organization where we're trying to do this massive shift in a very complex setup, there were some teams that doing this continuous improvement, Kaizen approach, we looked at them 12 months later and amazing changes, right? Changes that were sustained, that they continued on that path of improvement. The results were much different. We looked at some other teams that we started the same way. We started in the pilots, we moved them along. Inevitably, 2 or 3 months later, they would kind of stop that path. It would kind of fizzle out, they'd lose interest, they didn't have it as a priority. So I kind of examined what's in common by those teams that continued that path and had the best results. These were the 3 things that were in common to all those. So there was someone on the team, a champion, a practitioner from a bottoms-up standpoint that was driving, pushing it forward, that was passionate about it. So every one of these successful teams had one of those. But that wasn't it. Some teams had that person, but after a few months it didn't sustain. But the teams that sustained had a manager, first or second level manager, that supported, that encouraged, that actually made this a priority, made this something that the teams could continue to do, as opposed to never asking about it and just stressing the other stuff, the deadlines, the POR, all the other changes. And lastly, those teams that had the most success, basically the same as the survey showed, used DevOps Kaizen, right? They continually picked the next small thing. They didn't try to do it in a big bang manner. So these seem maybe obvious, but what they've taught us and what we've learned is that to now massively scale this across the entire organization, these are 3 things we want to absolutely make certain of, take care of, and help encourage a leader and help make sure there's some practitioner that's on the team that's going to champion. Many of you have seen this in large organizations that you've been in. I know I've seen it over the last several decades. Lean Enterprise, you might have seen that in that book, which is a great book. We go business as usual. We do a big transformation program, top down, big bang, everyone's going to change. And then after X number of months, we go back down to business as usual. Then the next big transformation comes along and we start improving and everyone's focused on that. And then some merger or some acquisition or some split or some major new program or project happens. And so this is a repeatable pattern that I think a lot of us have seen. So instead of doing that pattern, comes back to this DevOps Kaizen iterative approach where you set a small target, you attack that specific changes, you do an assessment, and you then decide what your next target is. And this is the number one change that I think culturally and across the large organization we're finding that makes the biggest difference to do that transformation. So I actually recommend, when people ask me, what do you recommend based on what you've learned, do you recommend a CEO saying, we're going to do this, everyone's going to do DevOps in the next, we're going to be done in the next 6 months? Actually, no. The recommendation is to instill a culture of Kaizen, of continuous improvement, where each team is assessing and making that change. And that coincides with the external survey we did as well. This is just an example of some of those teams that have been on this journey and seen some of the results. So you can see teams who have started with deployments that take literally days, just to go to integration environment, a full day to do that. Whereas once they're shifted now, it takes 5 minutes or less. We've seen teams that the build time's not only reduced, but that an MTP, a move to production, could take literally days and be very ridden with mistakes, with errors, with rework, et cetera, to the point where there's no downtime on that specific partner portal application when they do a release, and it's done literally in a couple of hours. They're still on the journey. They're still doing the Kaizen. They're still improving that to get that fully automated, but these are some of the results we're seeing. Maybe if I can call out one more at the bottom, this is a very large IoT solution. Hundreds and hundreds of developers, dozens of teams. And one of the key changes that this team has undergone is, we talked about feedback loops. It took them up to 90 days, up to 3 months before they would realize some of the deployment issues. And then they'd have to rewind and go back and figure out where those were caused. Now, within literally minutes, a short number of times, sometimes hours, they get the feedback, they know exactly what's going to happen in production because it's all automated, to be able to replicate the actual production environment and run through those tests automated. That is a big difference, to be able to realize where the issue is in a production environment within minutes or hours rather than within literally 3 months. So that was a game changer for this group. So we've done some other things inside to help sort of spread this culture and this knowledge. So if Olivier, you want to talk about DevOps days?
This is interesting. So I flew over to San Francisco, and I got to read half of the DevOps handbook. Not done yet, but it's getting there. And this is one thing that was actually recommended, is that if you guys in the company, start to really start to share your DevOps practices within your teams, just look at yourself and behind your walls, then you are going to be on a good way, because on your good path, right? And this is what we have been doing since, when was that, like 6 or 7 months or so. And I think we are the 6th event or 7th DevOps days, internal DevOps days. And we have people, the first one that we did was like a full day. I remember we had almost time shifts.
We had regions rolling in and presenting their own stories.
Yeah, we had India, China, and Europe, and then in the Americas. So, but basically what it is that we have sessions where people come in and you present something that is DevOps-y, right? And something that you did, not something that you dream about or that you have seen on the internet, but something that you did. So that's been very, very successful, and we have more coming in. But really, we can talk a lot about DevOps. I think the biggest issue that we have is really doing DevOps, right? So we have some teams, the first unicorns that we were showing you, but we have many more teams to convince, right? So how do we get everybody start doing DevOps? And this is really interesting. So a year ago, I was at this conference with my current manager, and there was this experience report from Target. Ross Clayton, and he shared this morning. Not Ross shared, but Target shared their status report, and they were flashing a picture about DevOps Dojo. And maybe, I don't know if you have noticed, but this morning, at the end of the presentation, there is one line: extend the DevOps Dojo setup. And I started. There was not much information about it, right? But we started to think about, okay, DevOps Dojo looks like it's a place where we practice DevOps, and we are going to, get better at doing DevOps. So we're inventing our own DevOps Dojo setup. We've run a number of those, actually, 8 dojos so far. And what DevOps Dojos are, it's really a place where, so first, we work with the team to find out what's their constraint, right? So following the lean principles, we understand, okay, if we look at what your work is today, we work on the value stream mapping exercise, and we see what's the problem. So very, very often, the biggest problem that people have is that they cannot have a test environment on demand or as needed quickly enough. Right? So you do a code check-in or a change, and you want to be able to test that automatically, hopefully, and if not, manually. But you never have the test environment done in time. It's always something that takes time. So that's an example. So we take that issue, and during 1 to 2 weeks, we have DevOps coaches that work with the team to actually address that problem. So hands-on, we isolate them in a building. They're not in their normal current working environment. We want to get them out of this, current working environment, and we work with them throwing DevOps practices at them, following their, trying to fix their issues. So, and we really focus on 1, 2, 3 maybe improvement themes, which I'm going to show you. And after that week, we have the follow-ups, the DevOps Kaizen setup that John was talking about. So monthly, we follow up, making sure that they evolve and that they grow. The one issue is that we didn't want to have the DevOps coaches or whoever team being there and being the kings, and they have to be there in the DevOps Dojo, and if you don't have those people, you are going to be in trouble. What we do is that in those dojos, we identify the change agents, the people who are there and are going to be, we know they are going to do awesome, and we qualify them as DevOps coaches for the next session, and then the next session they can run and actually participate and run the session themselves. Right? It's not about having a central team that organizes those dojos, but it's about finding the people, enabling them so that they can run with the principal, and so that this can go not viral, but at least beyond our team. And the improvement themes, are very classical. This is the framework we have been using, but it's not coming from us. We have the team describing their problems, so there are no and problem kind of lines there. Then what would be their definition of something that would be awesome? So for example, having the test environments on demand. For example, I do a code check-in and boom, the test environment is created. And then 6 weeks from now, what's going to be your next target condition? And for this, so we just reduced the scope and the timeline. And now let's talk about what we are going to do for this week, this 1 week, right? So it's very hands-on, very practical. It's interesting because people come in, the first day on the Monday, and it's 10 a.m. So they are kind of, I don't know what this is going to be, like a training or something. But then they stay late during the days. Those are never-ending days, so those DevOps Dojo are really, really interesting. And again, they are hands-on, and the other thing that is very, very interesting as well is that because we use social coding or an inner source, is that all of the material that we gather for one team, it's available for the next team to leverage. So very often we have lots of, for example, Docker containers that we leverage over and over. We bought the ChatOps bots that we use. They are shared. So all of that is kind of building, the common knowledge on DevOps and the common practice. So lots of benefits that we got and that we implemented. We implemented continuous delivery pipelines with many of the teams. Jenkins job as code as well. Non-downtime deploys, so zero downtime deploys. So we work with one team so that they actually can upgrade during business hours. And all of that is very practical, right? It's not theory. We are really fixing the things on their job. So if you look at our context, you saw the context of Hewlett Packard, who came, kind of splitting over and then acquiring a little bit. There's a number of things that help us, DevOps practices that help us being really efficient today, right? And that allow us to be ready for change and not be afraid of change, because change is our constant. So the non-negotiable deadlines, what do you call that in the US, SDDC?
SEC deadlines. When the split has to happen, it has to happen. You can't say, give us 2 more months. IT systems are not ready. They're pretty non-negotiable, right? Yeah,
so for that, the pipelines, the rapid feedback loops, the test automation really help in making sure that we hit the deadlines. About massive app clonings, the fact that we always have to almost duplicate the environment every time we spin off. Yeah. So infrastructure as code really helps. Self-infrastructure provisioning and the cloud capability that we are sharing really helps us. The fact that teams are moving and we are, people are changing company and we split and we are not able to talk to each other anymore. ChatOps is also a big enabler there. I cannot say any, big thing about ChatOps. It's really, really, really good. And the fact that we leverage all of our company now, all of the source code is shared across the company, or at least we try to be open by default. So we still have areas where it's actually not shared. But now many of the people end up searching first on our internal GitHub Enterprise versus the public one, because there is more relevant information on the internal one. And it's been very, very efficient. I think it's been a year and a half since the pilot started on this, and a year really it's in production. It's really awesome. And so all of those techniques help us being efficient. All right.
So I think we have time for some questions.
Yes,
Anyone
we
has any questions for us?
I don't know if there's a microphone.
Yeah.
There's one question.
There's a mic coming behind you there.
Could you comment on? I noticed that you use Chef and Ansible. Is that deliberate, or has that just happened through growth, or?
Yeah. So the question is about Chef and Ansible, and is that deliberate, and is that a duplicate? Actually, we used Puppet for a little while. So, HPE Enterprise is a big company. And there are a few things that we standardized on. For example, the source code management system is something that is it's non-negotiable. Everybody's on that system because, well, it has a lot of interest. The configuration management is something that teams select based on their context, based on their needs. We have huge Ansible users. We have huge Chef users. And actually, it's also coming from the fact that HPE Enterprise as a company has a lot of partnerships with those companies, right? So it's but this is not something that we standardized on. So, yeah.
In fact, sometimes it makes sense to not mandate a tool and mandate a process. There's a lot of advantages to empowering a team within certain guidelines, empowering a team for them to own it, for them to choose. And so we've kind of leaned more on the side of let's let them go as long as they're focusing on the continuous improvement and owning their results, that they tend to own it. We've been through many, many years of corporate mandates, and and people find ways to either work around it or comply but not really make it work. So that's kind of the balance, and we're kind of leaning more toward opening it up within certain guidelines. Yeah, in the back.
So you mentioned some sample projects that done and the results which have come by, but those were mostly like the portal or IT kind of projects. Have you utilized DevOps for, say, product development, especially hardware, software dependent device management kind of products?
Yes. So this particular story is about our own IT organization. But I can give you two specific examples. Some of the products you saw that are HP products, software development products, they are all adopting and are different stages of implementing DevOps to develop and release our own software products that a lot of you guys buy. For example, the HP testing tools or the apples that you saw here. We actually started doing DevOps, interestingly, a few years back when nobody was actually calling it DevOps. So if you've heard of Gary Gruber, he's one of the authors who's written a book. He's an ex-HP executive, and he was actually doing Agile and DevOps principles, applying them to large kind of scale in the printer division, right? So I think it was 2000 or 2001 when the bottom fell out of the world, right? Costs were drastically reduced, but the business demands kind of went up. And he applied the same principles for embedded software for our printers to go out. So we have applied it in that. We have applied it to our software products that we deliver. And this particular story is actually about our own IT organization that's either providing the services to our internal teams or even to external customers.
The hardware follows the waterfall model, right? You can't be.
So I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Hardware follows a waterfall model, right? You can't be agile. It's a fixed cadence, and it's limited improvements you can do stepping to stepping, right? Software can be agile, and both of them have to work together, right? So I would be curious to know or have a look at the case study. I have read that book from Gary Gerber.
Right.
It's about the firmware on the printing
It's about the
division.
firmware. It's not the actual hardware components.
Right, but he did it in 2011 and 12 time frame before he retired. The point which I couldn't get through in that particular book, and I was missing from my perspective in this presentation as well, as the tools that you have might utilize to have the hardware interface or the simulation environment morphed while the hardware is running the waterfall and software is running the agile. That part I am missing,
Yeah, and it's not an easy answer. So yes, the consequences when you have hardware. I mean, you are going to the hardware life cycle is like a year and a half-ish, depending on how you do the things, right? But the time you create the printing boards and then when it's going to be shipped, it's a long cycle, right? So, and you cannot really iterate on it as fast as you cannot do 10 deployment of hardware a day kind of thing. That doesn't exist. So the reality though is that there is a lot of hardware we have a lot of firmware on top of the hardware. But the hardware piece itself indeed has all of those constraints, right? So, but that's interesting because I just brought this slide because we are working with, we have, in HP Enterprise, we have a lot of hardware, and even more so right now. And we are working with them as well to identify if there are some of the practices that we have been doing in the software space that could apply in the hardware space, right? So I don't see DevOps as being only microservices and, cloud kind of things. There is a number of things techniques that probably can be applied. Frankly, if we look at that, we have been looking at, for example, the social coding aspects. So all of the diagrams, I mean the hardware, layouts and everything, VLSI and everything. We think that we can share them better. So it's interesting because some of the, I don't know if we can enter the tools things, but tools such as Cadence and others, they have some plugs now to plug into Git repository. So essentially you can share your hardware design across the teams and make them visible across the teams. We don't know if it's going to lead to any kind of improvement, but there may be some pieces there that are going to help the teams, the hardware teams, to iterate much more quicker. But I agree, it's yet a different world. I agree. Yeah.
Other questions?
All right.
Very good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.